Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Chased Out of Capital State Forest by Dissolvix. This happened years ago, but pops into my head a lot. I'm hoping maybe throwing it out into the ether will help me get over it. I just moved to Washington in October, and then around March or April of 2019, I made a friend who was stationed at JBLM, also not native to the state. He and I had been working on making the back of his pickup something we could camp in, and thought on a whim around midnight one night it would be fun to maybe go to the national park for the night. We made the drive out there, and I noted it's kind of weird that the road was lined with residential homes, and at some point the road turned to dirt, and I guessed we were in the park. This was a month or two after Snowmageddon, and the parks were out of season, so the road was pretty rough, but we did make it through. Not being from there, I had an eerie feeling right off the bat from the Douglas trees. They were bald, except for the very tops from the heavy snow. I didn't know what it was. They just felt unnatural and foreboding to me. They still do, even all these years later. Initially, we pulled off onto a little hill facing some tall grass that had a board for arrow practice. We hung out there for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and then I'd probably creeped out from the trees. I told my friend I didn't want to stay in that spot, because there was only a narrow path to drive in and out of, and I didn't love the idea of getting blocked in. He said all right, and we pulled out and headed down the road for a few minutes further, to find a proper parking area at a camping trailhead. We were using a portable battery we'd gotten for the first time, and it made this wild sound when he turned it on. So he stepped out of the truck and was outside, messing with it, and I was trying to relax in the back, but just couldn't shake that weird feeling. There wasn't a way to go directly from the bed to the cabin, and this being the first time that we'd been out there, we weren't just on the side of the road. I was a little anxious, so I stood outside for a minute just looking around and listening. I think I was more trying to hear for bears, since those were a new thing for me to have to worry about. But instead, I heard the sound of tires. I told my buddy to stop and listen, and then we saw headlights in the distance. We both threw the back of the truck shut and hopped in to leave. As we were driving out, the lights were at the top of the hill, and I told my buddy to slow down off to the side, thinking it was probably some sort of park official out to make sure we weren't causing any trouble, and then tell us to skedaddle. He rolled his window down, and as they passed, I looked, and the truck wasn't marked. But there were two men in the front, who were not park officials. They made direct eye contact with us and didn't slow down. But the second I saw their faces, I told my friend absolutely no. Fuck this, gun it. The truck continued towards the parking lot, and I felt a bit of relief, until I noticed they'd turned around and were now catching up to us. We were probably going 45 or 50 down some pretty rugged road, and they were directly behind us within a couple of minutes. Once we made it back to the residential street, which might have only been 1 or 2 turns from where we were, thank God my friend was able to remember the way back, that's when we hit around 60 or 70. The other truck hadn't backed up at all, and now had their brights on. I remember while looking out the window at the mirror noticing a house's porch light flick on, and I spun around to watch out the back, and I saw someone beginning to step out. I finally thought to glance over at the time, and it was around 3 a.m. The people at the house were probably unrelated, but still weird, but I was realizing that the time exaggerated how insane it was that people were chasing us. Anyway, we got to a stop sign and obviously didn't even slightly slow down as we pulled onto the main road. At that point, the truck then overtook us and passed us. They must have been going 100. Then they turned right down a side road. I was now pissed. I told my buddy that there's no way in hell they were going to get away. Let's go get them. We turned down the same road maybe 15 or 20 seconds after they had. But they were gone. There was a dead-end neighborhood street to the left that they couldn't have been on, a gas station a minute or two up the road that they weren't at, and then the interstate. How they made it all that way in such a short amount of time is beyond me, but the only explanation, save for going down the first side street, parking in a driveway and shutting off their truck, could have meant they went behind the gas station. But in either scenario, why were they the ones now hiding after chasing us? After all this happened, I looked up the park because, what the hell was that all about? We didn't go to Olympic National Park where I thought we'd been. We were instead in Capitol State Forest, where the only weird thing I could really find any information about was a body being found in a burned-out truck back in 2012. There's only a single article about that, so I have absolutely no idea if they ever figured that one out. Everything else I found was various accounts of people being shot or being found shot. But with there being gun activity allowed in the park, I didn't find that particularly surprising. More than likely, it was probably some people living on that street that noticed us going out there in the middle of the night, and maybe figured we were up to something, and that they would freak us out. I hope that's all it was, at least. I can't really imagine what would have happened if they had gotten to the parking lot while we were unprepared. Or worse, if we were still in that original spot where we stopped before trying to camp on that hill. A Night I'll Never Forget by BioNerd. For context, I'm an 18-year-old boy. I've always loved horror, from movies to games, and even find myself quite interested in true crime. So it kind of takes a lot to scare me, and I don't mean phobias. I do have a lot of those. I mean, it takes a lot to actually scare me. This happened around 2 years ago, and I try to forget the night since it still freaks me out. I live in a very small village in the middle of nowhere, and it's a 30 or so minute walk to the town over, which is where my cousin, who's the same age as me, lives. She and I are incredibly close, so we always hung out. The walk to her village is very much a nature walk. There's a path that leads to a bridge, and once you're over the bridge, there's a small little clearing with a bench, and then it's a long, straight 25-minute walk. The path is surrounded by huge hedges on both sides, so at night it is quite ominous. The night this happened, I remember it being in January, and it was the first time that year I was walking over to see her. And like always, I decided to go rather late, around 9 p.m. I was wearing trackies, a hoodie, and a coat, which is important, as I decided new year, new me, and that I'd run the distance to try and start getting in better shape. Now, that little opening with the bench that I mentioned, by the time I got there, I was sweating due to wearing so many layers, so I stopped to take my hoodie off and wrap it around my waist. I had headphones in, so I took them out so they didn't get knocked out by the hoodie coming off. The second I took my headphones off, I heard a noise from the right side of me in the bushes near the bench. When I looked, I saw someone in the bushes. It was so dark, though, I could barely make them out, but I know they were crouched down. The weirdest part was that their hands were up on either side of their head, just sprawled out. Obviously, that motivated me to run my ass all the way to her house. I told her, and she offered to walk me home, but I didn't want her to have to do the walk back alone, so instead we agreed we'd stay on call, and she just walked me to the start of the walk home. Now, keep in mind, her village, coming from the walk from my village, starts with a park, and that's where she walked with me to. We didn't pass anyone on the way to the park, and there was no one else in it. Then I began walking, and we stayed on the phone, and I was still creeped out, so I was looking around me, and when I looked behind me, I saw someone walking in my direction. I asked if it was my cousin, or if she had seen anyone else pass her, to which she replied no, to both things. It's safe to say I ran the entire way back, and when I got to the first lamppost where there was finally some light, I looked back to see that whoever was behind me was gone. Not to mention, my cousin actually mentioned that a few months before this, she and her friend had been walking home at night and saw a man alone on the tire swing in the park at night. Safe to say, I run that walk every time now if it's dark and still wonder who the hell that was to this day. My area is creepy as hell, and I do have a few other creepy experiences to share, but I thought that this one was by far the creepiest. He Wouldn't Go Away, submitted by Darla V. Lilly. Back in 2018, my dad invited his friend's son to come and spend a few weeks with him for a contracting job he had. This guy was in his early 20s and was pretty lost at the time, and his parents didn't know what to do with him. I remembered him vaguely from when we were kids, as our families have been friends since before I was born. For reference, at this time I was also in my early 20s and living with my boyfriend, and our house was just around the corner from my dad's. My dad and I are very close, and one of my sisters was living with him at the time, so my boyfriend and I were over there a lot. This guy was pretty weird and would randomly go quiet when we were all hanging out, and he would just stop talking and look down. Then there were times when he was chatty and seemed fairly normal. We knew he wasn't going to be there long, so we just tried to make him feel welcome while he was there. One night, my boyfriend, I'll call him Carter, and I invited this guy, who we'll call Braden, out to a buck and doe with us. We told him he could come by our house before heading over for a few drinks, then we would all walk down together. I was surprised when he said yes, because he was pretty socially awkward, but sure enough, the night rolled around and he came over, and we all got ready to head to the buck and doe. The buck and doe was denim-themed. I know, very Canadian, and I remember cutting up some old jeans to make us all headbands. They were completely stupid looking, but that was kind of the point. But anyway, we got to the party, and he didn't know anyone, so I remember him being pretty much glued to my side. The night wasn't all that memorable, at least not for me. And when we started walking back, I told Braden to send me a text to let me know when he made it back to my dad's. He did, and thanked me for letting him come out with us. Fast forward a few weeks later, and the guy was still around. The job he worked with my dad on was over, and I remember my dad was getting kind of anxious to get rid of him, as he was ready to just have his space back. Braden asked if he could just stay until my birthday, which was coming up, so my dad agreed. On my birthday, I remember him being really quiet and just looking down a lot, which, as I said before, he did often. He just got into this mood where you could tell there was something weird going on in his head. And shortly after that, my dad told him it was time to head back home, and he reluctantly did. A few days later, I got a text from Braden saying that he had to tell me something, and it was too important to text. I remember thinking, WTF? We weren't that close, and what could he possibly have to tell me? I called my sisters, and they jokingly said he was about to confess his love for me. I told him that I couldn't talk on the phone at the moment, but he could text me whatever it was he had to say. To my absolute horror, he did indeed confess his love for me, using some very strong language. It was poetic and intense, and I was in disbelief. This guy came to my house where I lived with my boyfriend. We hardly knew each other. He was only around for about a month, and most of the time when I was there, he was quiet, and I was always with my boyfriend. At first, I tried to let him down gently, and I told him that while I was flattered, I was very much in love with my boyfriend, but we could still be friends. Braden started droning on and on about how we were meant to be. He could feel it in his soul, and how he needed me like a bee needs pollen, and how now that he had a glimpse of me, he needed a future with me. I immediately showed the messages to my boyfriend, who was also shocked, but kind of laughed it off. He knew there was no chance this was going to happen and basically just said I should block him. I told Braden firmly at that point that it was not, nor was it ever going to happen. Time to move on, I'm not interested. And then I blocked him. I told my dad what he had said, and he told me that his friends had actually told him that Braden came home talking about his love for me, so he knew his feelings and not to worry because he wouldn't be inviting him back. That's when the messages started coming from different numbers, and I just ignored them all. Soon I was getting phone calls at all hours of the day and night, all from different numbers and sometimes from businesses. It was always him, basically asking for a chance and telling me how much he loved me. I know I should have changed my number, but I had that number since high school and I really didn't want to go through the trouble of changing it. He also sent gifts, which often included healthy teas and weird supplements, and also a CD full of songs he wrote and performed about me. Again, the scary thing was that he hardly knew me. The whole time he was here visiting, conversation always stayed very surface level, like acquaintances, which is how I viewed us. But he had this idea of me that he concocted in his head, and I became his obsession. At some point, my boyfriend just started answering my phone, basically telling him to fuck off. I mean, enough was enough, and I could tell that Carter was getting more concerned than he was mad. By October, which was about 8 months after this all started, things finally started to quiet down. We thought Braden was finally going to move on. I hadn't even responded to any of this since I blocked his first number. So, now it was Halloween, and Carter and I were going to our buddy's house, who lived a few blocks away, to hang out and help him hand out candy. He lives in a well-populated area that gets bombarded with kids on Halloween. Earlier in the day, I got a phone call from my dad saying that his friends had called to let him know that Braden had taken off in the middle of the night, and they didn't know where he was, but they wondered if he was trying to make his way back up to our town. They said he'd been wearing that denim headband I made him for a month, and he was talking more and more about how he needed me before vanishing. I was deeply disturbed when I found that out, but he did live 6 hours away and had no vehicle. My dad said that if he showed up at the house, he would send him right home and make it clear that he was not welcome there. Although Carter and I were initially on edge by the fact that he'd vanished, by evening we'd kind of put it on the back burner. We're just having fun hanging out with our friend. Normally, when we hang out with this friend, I drive home when I'm ready to call it a night, and Carter walks home later. But around 10 o'clock, as I was getting ready to leave, he decided to jump in the car with me just in case. I don't know if it was the dark or just this sense of foreboding, but I started to feel pretty anxious driving home, and was hyper-vigilant of my surroundings. Of course, our street is not well lit, and it was a particularly dark night. As I was about to turn into our driveway, though, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The quick flash of a cell phone screen. It was only lit up for a second before going dark, and all of a sudden I saw the faintest outline of a guy sitting under the tree in front of our house. I panicked and passed our driveway completely and started rounding the corner. Carter was looking at me with utter confusion, and I said to him, horrified, "He's at our house." Before I even stopped the car, Carter opened the door and jumped out and yelled, "Go to your dad's now." Then he was taking off towards our house. I know, we should have called the cops, but I think we were in such disbelief, and the weird connection of him being our family's friend's son just made it feel like it wasn't the obvious course of action. I showed up at my dad's, who I was pretty sure was about to go to bed, and there I am, freaking out, telling him that I think Braden is at my house, and that Carter had gone to confront him. My dad looked completely horrified and was shocked that this guy had the nerve to show up at his daughter's house for God knows what reason. I started frantically trying to call Carter, and my calls were going right to voicemail. And I finally texted him and said, "If I don't hear back from you in the next 2 minutes, I'm calling the police." I got a text back saying, "I'm okay, call you soon." After what felt like forever, Carter finally messaged me to tell me that he would be walking Braden to my dad's and that when he was halfway there, he wanted me to leave and then head home. Carter had a lot of experience dealing with people with mental health issues, so he's got a ton of patience, God bless him. He's also a good communicator and is generally good at diffusing situations. So I headed home, and my dad was going to make sure Braden spent the night at his house and was sticking him on a bus first thing in the morning. At that point, it was around midnight. So I got home, and shortly after, so did Carter. He was pretty vague about the conversation he had with Braden, but when I kept prying about why he had come out here in the first place, Carter said his response was that he just needed a chance. He also said that he wasn't even wearing a coat and was freezing when he found him. He brought him into the garage to talk to him and let him warm up, but wouldn't let him in our house. He also firmly told him that he would not be seeing me. Carter also told me that Braden was just clutching his backpack the whole time and never took his eyes off Braden's hands, as he wasn't sure if he had a weapon. I still wonder what would have happened if I had gone home alone like I usually did and found him under my tree, and I shuddered at the thought. I have no idea what his plan was. It turns out he didn't even have enough money for a bus ticket home, and no one really knew how he got all the way from his house to mine in the 12 or so hours that he had been missing. A few days passed, and I got a message from Braden basically apologizing and saying I took him showing up the wrong way. I mean, I'm not sure how I should have taken it, but anyway, he went on and on about how he respected my relationship and just wanted to be friends, but needed me in his life. I didn't respond. And then a few months went by and all was quiet, and I was finally starting to think that Braden had moved on. And then, one night in February, I was at my dad's for dinner and I was waiting for Carter, who should have been arriving momentarily, when all of a sudden the doorbell rang. I thought the door must have been locked because Carter would have just walked in, so I was on my way to let him in, and my phone went off. It was Carter, and it was a text saying, "Do not open the door." Apparently, he had just pulled in, and to his absolute disbelief, he could see a guy standing at the door with a guitar, and he knew it was Braden. Before I could say anything, my dad opened the door, and all I heard was, "Oh, what the fuck? Out!" My dad went to basically tell him to get lost, that he wasn't staying there this time, and that he wouldn't be seeing me, and that he was on his own how to figure out where to go or how to get home. Braden threw down the roses he had in his hand and called my dad an asshole before storming away. At that point, I'm pretty sure it took Carter every ounce of self-restraint not to go after Braden. That night, I got a voicemail from a motel which was unfortunately close to my house. The voicemail said, "If you don't want to be my rock star girlfriend and travel the world with me, then fine." For the next little while, Carter slept with a bat and was constantly on alert. Carter is a strong, stocky guy, and I heard he had been pretty scrappy back in high school. His friends told me that no one ever messed with him, but I guess you can't be too careful when it comes to crazy. Carter reached out to a friend in the police department and gave him everything, the messages, the dates, let him know what gifts were sent, songs that were written, just so that they had it in case Braden ever showed up again. I heard from Braden sporadically after that, and he did reach out to tell me that he'd sought help, and that he suffers from psychosis which leads him to make rash, impulsive decisions, and that he was now on medication. However, once in a while, I still get the odd message saying that he needs me in his life, and those I still ignore. Carter and I are now married and have a couple of kids. We've moved from that house, so Braden doesn't know where we live now, which I think gives us both peace of mind. Honestly, I have no ill will for the guy, and I hope he continues getting help and stays on the right track. And hopefully, in time, he will forget about me. The Night I Heard a Demon by True Station. The year was 1997, and I'd just gone through a divorce with my now ex-wife. It was my first night back at home, only it didn't feel like home at all. When I pulled into the driveway, the old wooden structure from the 1800s didn't have any lights on, and it looked like a mass of black, just a void that only took the shape of a house by coincidence. The house had been a place of warmth, of love, and of connection, but there wasn't a single sound as I walked through the old house that I once called home. The bare walls had once shown an array of framed pictures of what was once a happy family, and now they stared back at me with a blank expression, kind of mocking me with eyes that were left from the nails that had been removed. A lot of the furniture that once had been there was now gone, making the inside of it look even more vast and cold, as if I didn't already feel small. After my initial walkthrough, I set my keys on the kitchen counter, took off my boots, and headed upstairs to my bedroom to try to sleep. I had no clue what was in store for me that night. As I made my way up the stairs, the wooden treads squeaked and creaked as they compressed just as they had many times before, but this night it was different. The sounds were more visceral, like they were telling me, warning me to not ascend. But I went up anyway. I made my way to my bedroom and laid down on my back with my clothes still on. I didn't have the energy nor the wherewithal to be comfortable. And there I spent hours in a daze, with thoughts and memories racing like a ribbon of film on a Super 8 projector. The only sound in my company was that of the ringing of my ears due to tinnitus. I couldn't fall asleep, and the red glow from my alarm clock never ceased to remind me so. 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and then around 2 a.m., it happened. As I lay there lost in my thoughts, I suddenly heard a long smash coming from the kitchen downstairs that shook the floor beneath me, sending a chill up my spine. The hairs on my arms were standing on end, and I was frozen with fear. The ringing in my ears from tinnitus ceased, leaving only the sounds being that of my heavy breathing and the ever-increasing rate of my heartbeat. I laid there stiff as a statue, and more noises came, barely audible at first. I couldn't tell what it was, but then it got louder and louder. Footsteps. The sound of the footsteps were slow, heavy, and methodical. As I just lay there, I could hear another sound that accompanied the footsteps. There was the sound of what I can only describe as the breathing and growling of what would only come from a monster or a demon, and whatever it was going to rip me apart. The sound got louder and louder, and each step shook the whole house, sending the most intense feeling of fear I've ever felt in my life. I heard another sound that sounded all too familiar now. The squeaking of the stairs, accompanied by a loud thud. I knew that this thing was making its way up the stairs. This thing must have been 800 pounds. The breathing, the growling, and thuds got louder and louder. Closer. I finally got the last little bit of courage up that remained in me, and I ran into my closet and grabbed my 12-gauge shotgun, racked a shell into the chamber. And suddenly, there was silence. Nothing. I was so scared that I stayed in my closet until sunrise. And then I finally decided to make my way downstairs, shotgun still in hand, to find that the front door was wide open, and the silverware drawer had been pulled out completely from its cabinet and was lying upside down, with silverware strewn all about the kitchen floor. I know that this seems hard to believe, but it's 100% true. It wasn't a dream, and I've never taken a drug in my life. I'm a man of faith, and I believe that this happened because I had lost faith during the divorce. I was severely depressed and in a dark place. I also hadn't been going to church. After that, I started going to church every Sunday, and I haven't had a visit from that thing ever since. I still live in the same old house today, and although there are many other stories I could tell, none of them are as terrifying or as visceral as that experience. Unwanted Visitor, submitted by Dulcita. Growing up, I always liked anyone else who had older siblings and had them tell me stories to scare me. This particular story wouldn't have been so bad if it were just my oldest brother telling me it. But I remember my mother telling me as well. Let me start off by saying that I come from a big family. There are 6 of us kids that my mom had, 4 older boys, myself, and my younger brother. The story begins in our little house, except my younger brother on account that he hadn't been born yet. There were 3 bedrooms in the home, and the first bedroom my 2 oldest brothers shared. The second one my 2 younger of the 4 brothers shared. And then there was me, who slept in my mom's room in a cradle. According to my oldest brother, one night before going to bed, all of them were being rowdy and decided that they all wanted to sleep in the same room to see who could stay up the longest. So they asked my mom's permission to sleep all together in one room, and my mom said it was okay on one condition, that they all not be so loud because I was asleep, and that they had to try to at least go to bed at a decent hour. They agreed and went to the room. Of course, the boys began to get loud and rowdy again, and my mom was forced to go in and give them a warning. And as she turned away, she saw my oldest brother stick out his tongue at her. So she quickly turned around and told him that that wasn't nice to do that, and that God didn't like little boys being so hateful, and if he continued to do it, the devil would snatch his tongue. Now, keep in mind, my mother at that time was a profound Catholic, and not to mention Hispanic, and well, God and the devil played big roles in her life. My brother, not liking my mom's comment, said in return, "Well, if that's true, then I'll be seeing him soon." My mom gave him a bad look and turned and walked out of the room. As the night progressed, my brother said he was the last to fall asleep, and as he was drifting off, he felt someone grab the blankets and rip them off him abruptly. He thought it was one of my other brothers messing with him, so he snatched the blankets back and yelled, "Alex, stop doing that." And of course, there was no response from Alex because Alex was fast asleep. My brother was laying on his side, keep in mind, and he said that he felt someone tug at his toes. He opened his eyes, this time to see if it was Alex or one of the other boys. And to his surprise, he saw a very dark figure staring back at him at the end of the bed near his feet. My brother, terrified, said he couldn't get a sound out of his mouth, and he continued to watch as this figure climbed on top of the bed and somewhat sat on him with a devilish grin and was pinning him down. My brother froze in horror as he heard this figure say what he said sounded like, "Maybe next time you'll listen to your mother." After that, my brother said he seemed to have just kind of passed out. He woke up a few moments later, confused and scared, and ran to my mom, who was sitting in the kitchen waiting for our dad to get home from work. He began to tell my mom the story, and to his amazement, my mother said she believed him, and then began to tell him that moments after the boys had settled to fall asleep, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a dark figure passing from the living room to the hallway, but thought it was nothing and passed it off as her being tired from a long day. And maybe she was just seeing things. But then, to their amazement, they found what appeared to be scratches on his back, arms, and one leading from his cheek down to the side of his mouth. My brother, horrified by what he had experienced, never again talked back or stuck his tongue out at our mom, in hopes that he would never experience what he had again. Thanks for listening, gang. If you've got a true scary story of any nature you'd like me to narrate, email it to UncleJosh, truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. There's a link to my TeePublic storefront down in the description if you'd like to get some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. Summer is not over yet, and you'll be the coolest kid on the block. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.